All right. Welcome, folks, to the YPPN. If you're catching this up on repeat, we have a great speaker today. We have Laura, who heads up our YACVic affirmative consent work. And so Laura's going to talk to us a little bit about the formation of that project, how the team created the education workshops, and tell us a bit about what to expect in those workshops. So I'll throw over to you, Laura, and then we'll open up for questions at the end.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you all so much for having me here. It's great to be able to chat about my favorite thing, consent. Love it. So before I begin, I'll just take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. I'm joining today from Gunditjmara country in Warrnambool, and pay my respects to any to elders past, present, and emerging, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples with us today, acknowledging that sovereignty was never ceded. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So today I am here to talk to you about YACVic, which is an affirmative consent education workshop. So we'll talk a bit about the workshop, a little bit about the legislative changes, peer-led education, another one of my favourite things, the design, development, and delivery of our project, and of course, share some learnings of the project and what we've discovered along the way, because there's been many opportunities for learning, which is always a good thing as well. So first of all, what is YACVic? Well, this project came about as a result of the affirmative consent reforms that came into play in Victoria on July 30th in 2023. And it's all about adopting a new way to deal with unwanted sexual activity, including sexual violence. It aims to place a greater focus on the actions of the person using sexual violence to have sought consent, rather than what the victim survivor did or did not say or do. So the goal of YACVic was to build the capacity of young people to understand this new legislation, raise awareness around the different forms and misconceptions surrounding sexual violence, as well as inform, educate, and empower young people on affirmative consent using a peer-led youth participation model. That peer-led model is where our strength lies. Nothing we do lacks a young person's perspective and input, because we know how important it is for young people to have a say in the issues that matter to them. And young people really do care about consent, and I think we've discussed that today already. They care about knowing how to navigate relationships, about how to say no, how to say yes, how to communicate their needs. But they care about hearing how to do all of that from people that they can relate to. And I'm sure that that's something we can all relate to. And that's why we're so lucky that when we piloted this project, we were actually able to hire 5 local Mallee young people to be peer educators, as this was a pilot project in the Mallee. And these young people were the ones who shaped the program to be what it is today. I think to start off, I'd really like to share a little bit about what that peer educator experience was like for some of our peer educators. So being the Mallee, it's a really diverse area, and we were lucky to have a really diverse crew working with us. And specifically one of our peer eds, Presley, a young Pacifica man from Robinvale, he was supported by the youth services team at Swan Hill Rural City Council and the Southern Mallee team at YACVic to apply for the role of YACVic peer educator when the opportunity came about. And being from Robinvale, Presley had noticed that through his own experience that sexual health and consent wasn't being spoken about in his community, and he was really keen to be involved in changing that narrative. When he first joined the team, he'd never done any form of facilitation and was quite reserved when it came to group discussions. A part of that hesitation came from his experience growing up in a rural town, and with a cultural background where taboo topics just weren't necessarily discussed in this way that we do so openly now. And it was a real learning curve for him to be able to contribute to discussions and overcome the social barriers that had become the norm for him. So over the past 2 years now, Presley's developed his confidence in discussing these topics exponentially. Not only does he contribute incredible and creative ideas to team meetings and trainings, but has been one of the most dedicated people in making sure that his skills are the best that they can be. This project, this workshop, has really given him the opportunity to turn a passion into a job, in which he's regularly inspiring his community, peers, and colleagues. His role has not only involved supporting the development of the YANAR workshop, but delivering it to communities across the Mallee, answering questions and supporting young people in these workshops, and working behind the scenes to develop extra resources for young people as well, some of which I'll share with you a bit later on. From his very first facilitation of the YANAR workshop, he showed immense growth, and his ability to engage an audience of young people when talking about a topic that is traditionally so taboo is inspiring to watch. He's just been incredible. This quote on the screen is directly from him. My experience being a part of YANAR as a peer educator has been an eye-opener. I've learned a lot along the way, and it's helped me with personal growth, like stepping out of my comfort zone. It has been nothing less than an amazing experience. I think that quote really encapsulates how meaningful and important peer-led approaches can be, and how important it is to have young people at the forefront of the work that we're doing. So this peer-led approach has also meant that there's a certain reliability when it comes to talking about subjects that maybe some people view as something tough to approach, a so-called touchy subject. I think most people, I think the most important thing to do in order to have these conversations is to ensure that you've created a safe space for sharing. Trauma-informed communication is really important as a part of these conversations, and we need to ensure that discussions around sexual violence and consent are done in a way that is supportive and safe. And I'll talk a bit more about how we do that later on as well. One of the things that made it so special to have these young people at the forefront of this project was exactly what I've mentioned, that they were rural young people, born and raised in the Mallee, meaning that they have a keen understanding and awareness of the challenges that rural young people face. And we've continued that throughout the project, is that it's rural young people that have a really keen understanding of what young people in today's society are experiencing. They know that their peers don't feel comfortable going to the doctors to talk about their sexual health because the receptionist is their mum's best friend's cousin, and they know that, you know, it'll get back to mum eventually. They don't feel comfortable going to the pharmacy and asking for the morning after pill because they've never once walked in there and not seen someone that they know. You know, they can't buy condoms from Woolies without being seen by at least one of their classmates who are stocking shelves down the row. Like, it's almost impossible for young people to feel safe enough in their own community to access basic sexual health care because they just don't feel comfortable doing so. We know that the stigma is there when it comes to sexual health in small communities like those that make up the Mallee and plenty of other communities in rural and regional Victoria. This stigma has a really big effect on our young people. And consent is a really big part of that conversation that isn't being had, because hearing the same teacher that taught all your siblings and potentially your mum try to tell you about the intricacies and realities of being a young person in today's society isn't going to land well with young people. It's not what they want or what they need. What young people are telling us that they need is a judgment-free space. It's education that is relevant to them. It's education that is interactive and meaningful and honest. And it needs to be delivered by people who do understand what it's like to be a young person in today's society. So that's how we've structured YANAR. Now, the name YANAR, I feel like I have to address it every time because we do, you know, we get the question, why on earth would you name it that? That just seems a bit tricky. And it's a valid question, but the answer is really, really simple. It's because of everything that I've just mentioned, because we're appealing to our target audience. We want to appeal to young people by using their language. And yeah, nah feels like the epitome of the modern young person's language. You could ask my mum if you wanted, Laura, want to unload the dishwasher for me? Yeah, nah. Thanks for asking, mum, but I'm going to pass on that one today. Be at a party. Hey, mate, you want to go behind that tree? Hook up? Yeah, nah. Thanks for asking and respecting my boundaries, though. I really appreciate that. So again, it's all about appealing to our target audience and making sure that every step of the way, we're having conversations with young people to make sure that we're hitting the mark. This slide gives a little bit of information about the legislation changes that have happened recently, and is a big part of what we talk about in the Yeah Nah workshop. We talk about the changes to the definition, and then the additions to the law on stealthing, as well as intimate image abuse. So just a little bit of a sneak peek, I suppose, at some of what we talk about. But the reason that I wanted to include this and my next slide is, before I jump into the kind of co-design process and the development process of what the workshop, to get the workshop to where it is now, I wanted to just share a little bit about kind of what the workshop looks like and how the resources have turned out. So I mentioned earlier that as a part of the project, we were also set out to develop a series of resource videos, and they were all about educating young people on the new affirmative consent legislation. And a big part of that legislative change included the criminalisation of stealthing. We've found that stealthing, whilst it's not known for the term, like stealthing as a term isn't really identified within, like, I guess with young people. The action is, so it's kind of given a name to what the action is, which is the intentional non-use, tampering, or removal of a condom without the permission or knowledge of the other people involved. And yeah, one of the incredible things to come out of this project is the video that I wanted to show. And I think it really shows that how, when you work with young people, it just gives some of the most incredible outcomes. So I'll play that video for you now. Stealthing is the intentional non-use, tampering, or removal of a condom during sexual activity without the consent of the person or people involved.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So they went home together?
Yeah, but did you hear what happened?
No, what?
She got an STI.
What? Surely they used a condom.
Well, they did, but when she messaged him to ask about it, he said he took it off halfway through. It's pretty messed up.
That can't be legal.
It's not. In fact, in the state of Victoria, stealthing is now regarded as an act of sexual violence.
So I hooked up with this girl on the weekend. She wanted me to use a condom, but I took it off when she wasn't looking. Felt way better.
You took it off without her knowing?
Yeah.
That's pretty sketchy. I'm pretty sure it's illegal.
If a person agrees to sex with a condom and you remove it without their knowledge, then you haven't gotten consent. It's not just an unethical thing to do, it's now illegal. So I think that video really encapsulates what can be achieved when we invest in young people, when we take their experience and utilize their expertise, and then also pay them for their time. All of those young people were paid for their time in the creation of that video, and it led to the development of this video. And I was mind blown. Like, when we filmed that, I was kind of standing behind the camera going, have we got like future superstars in our midst? Because that acting is better than mine, and I am like a drama queen. So I was pretty blown away. And I think it just really shows how incredible the talent is with young people and how eager they are to be involved. I thought it would be so hard to get some young men to be involved in creating a video like that. They are so keen to be in more videos, so I've got to somehow come up with some more ideas. So if anyone's got some, please shout out, because they're just keen to get their acting shoes back on, and they love the conversations that it's starting amongst their mates and being able to talk about it. So it's just incredible. So the next couple minutes, I really want to deep dive into the processes that we used in order to get to where we are today. And the first thing, before we even talk about the design elements, is investing in our young people. So the lived experience of our peer eds is a huge asset. However, just because they're experts in their own experience doesn't mean that we were going to throw them in the deep end and expect them to be able to stand up in front of a group of other young people and deliver a workshop. We knew that we also had to invest in them and their development. So we actually flew all of them to Melbourne for a week and had an immersive training week, which I've shared the agenda with to give you a bit of an insight into that. And whilst, of course, we wanted them to feel equipped in the topics of sexual health and consent, it was also imperative that we invested in their training in other areas to ensure that whatever the workshop whatever workshop we did deliver was as safe as it could be. So we jammed a lot into a week. It was a huge week, and I reckon I probably needed a month off afterwards to recover, but it was also just fantastic. It's important to acknowledge that investing in the young people who work for you isn't a one and done thing, though. We did have a massive week this week, but we also continued investing in their training and development as well over the 18 months that we were running this project in the Mallee, having regular community of practices, extra training sessions based on what they were telling us that was going to be beneficial for them and what they needed in order to do their jobs to the best of their ability. So you can see here that we did things like meaningful acknowledgement of country and cultural safety. Really important aspects to being able to deliver a meaningful workshop is being able to acknowledge the land that you're meeting on, the pain of Indigenous peoples, and also the cultural barriers that comes with delivering consent education, sexual health education when talking to young Indigenous people as well. We did some together training by the Youth Disability Advocacy Service. So learning about how we can make our spaces inclusive and ensuring that everybody felt welcome. Another incredible training. Sexual Health Victoria delivered their peer mentorship training. We'd partnered with Consent Labs, who are absolute leaders in this space and deliver incredible education across Australia. So having them present and helping our peer educators be comfortable facilitating specifically around consent education, being comfortable answering the uncomfortable questions was really important, and they were phenomenal in building the confidence of our young peer educators. We then had Marie Crabb come in and do her porn awareness training as well, which was so insightful, and yeah, really had some incredible conversations around that, because of course porn is a huge topic amongst young people and something that we do get asked about a lot as well. So then moving on to that co-design process, there's 1,000,001 ways that you can do this. So don't take this as me telling you that this is the one and only, because there is so many ways that you can implement co-design into the work that you're doing. This is what worked for us, and it worked really well in our case. So the process that we used, we wanted to make sure that the workshop and the periods really felt like they had ownership over the workshop. We wanted it to be something that they'd created. Obviously, it was my job working 4 days a week to be able to actually put all of their ideas together. And then because of the time restraints that we had as well, this worked best for us. So we first started out with a big day of brainstorming, which was really incredible. My tip for brainstorming days is structure them as much as you can, because if you don't, then it can be a little bit like pulling teeth. So structure your brainstorming, have really direct questions that you want to ask in order to make sure that there's actually conversations happening, not just sitting down saying, okay, let's have a brainstorm and then expecting the conversation to flow wildly from there. Structuring that will be really, really helpful. With all of the ideas that came from that, it was then up to me as the project officer to kind of put those ideas into a run sheet, start drafting out what that might look like. Then we wanted to make sure that we were hitting the mark. So the periods and I went out and did community consultations with young people. We held some focus groups with local youth groups and made sure that their input was being heard as well, making sure that we were really hitting the mark with the activities that we wanted to run and the content that was involved in the workshop. Of course, we took on expert advice as well, discussing with Consent Labs a lot, also utilising our local contacts in the Mallee, talking with Mallee Family Care Legal Service, ensuring that all of the education and information that we had was on point, and also utilising the connections throughout the funded group as well. So thank you to YACVic for that as well. We'll shout out. And then once all of that had been said and done, and once there had been a draft, it was then put back in the hands of the periods to make sure that it was still their project. It didn't, and that the run sheet was in their language. It wasn't me talking, it was them talking. And so I did get called out many a time for how many times I would run an activity. I'd write an activity into the run sheet, and then at the end of, like at the start of the next bit, I'd be like, amazing, thanks for your input. And I'd always write that. So then every time we then delivered anything, like if we were in a group setting with the periods, every time we all sat back down, they would just go, amazing, moving on to the next topic. So now I can't say amazing ever again in my entire life because I'm mortified. So thanks for that, periods. Love them. So that was kind of the design and development style that we went with, and it worked really well. It was a feedback loop, which was really nice. It gave them the opportunity to put all their ideas in, me to structure it in the way that was going to work best, and then again that feedback loop. So it was always going back to them, and it was always them making the final call, which was really important. Then we move on to the delivery of the project. Of course, the one thing that this is all built up to. And in terms of the delivery, we had a lot of things to consider. First of all, the safety of our periods, safety for the young people we'd be delivering to. So for the periods, we needed to ensure that they felt safe delivering each workshop. The best way to mitigate the risk of them going into a situation unprepared is to do a pre-brief before each workshop. So this ensures that we can discuss everything from travel arrangements, specifics for the workshop, like what icebreakers they're going to run, what scenarios and activities they'll use, ensuring they know the traditional owners of the land that they're going to, so we can pay our proper respects. And then, of course, ensuring that any context for that particular workshop provided by the host is given to those facilitators. So if there's some cultural sensitivities, if there's been a specific incident in that community that we should be aware of, the facilitators have all that information. A post-workshop debrief is also really important, not for only noting anything that went wrong. You know, there maybe was a joke that didn't land, there was conflict between participants, there was disclosure that they needed to follow up with, any of that stuff. So important to note, and that's of course what a debrief is about. But what's also really important is to discuss what went right. What are we proud of from this particular delivery? What improvements did we notice in ourselves that we can take note of and be proud of ourselves for? Another really, really important aspect. And then, of course, open communication lines between the facilitators and the project officer, myself, and my manager as well, their manager. So ensuring that they had access to us before and after the workshops, so that if they needed any support, we were there. Then there's participant safety, so taking into account what we can do to create as safe a space as possible. Content warnings are important. It's a discussion we've been having a lot lately, but ensuring that young people know what they're walking into. Creating an environment that is safe to leave. This is something that we learned from our early deliveries, but we needed to make sure that young people felt comfortable to step out if they needed to. So ensuring that group sizes were large enough or comfortable enough that they felt like it wasn't a big deal if they walked out, and that they had a clear exit strategy. So, you know, this is where the bathrooms are. If you need to go, just go, making sure that they know that they had autonomy to kind of do what they needed to do in order to feel safe. And then, of course, providing resources and local support services. So in the Mallee, everything was kind of individualised. And then now that we are hosting a statewide delivery, just ensuring that we've researched the services in a local area before we attend it. And that's a lot easier, you know, when we're working with organisations that are local to the community as well. This is a look at the resources that we do kind of offer. So at the end of each workshop, we also have some handouts, but this is obviously Mallee specific, but we have the services, we have some websites, But then again, appealing to young people, we also have Instagram accounts that we think that the periods have engaged with and think are really helpful, and that, you know, give great information in an accessible manner on Instagram, and podcasts as well that they've engaged with and think are really great resources. So again, appealing to our audience in every way that we can. And then the final aspect to our delivery is the flair of each delivery. So ensuring that each workshop is actually personalized to the community and the group that we are delivering to. So for example, last night we were delivering to a queer youth group. We ensured that there was specific scenarios that made young people who are queer feel heard. We made sure that the whole workshop was delivered through a queer lens, and the feedback at the end of that was that for the first time, we felt seen. We felt like this wasn't a workshop that was designed for cis-het young people. It was actually designed for us. So that is the feedback that we're getting. So it's nice to know that what we're doing is working. And just, I guess, a bit of a green light that it's all going right at this stage. So it's really important to us that every workshop is specifically designed for the group that we are delivering to. The workshop is adaptable based on the group. So if it needs to be divided into men's and women's business in order to maintain cultural safety, that's something that we're willing to do, because we'd rather that young people from cultural backgrounds actually access the information and get the education, separated genders, rather than just not having the education at all, because that doesn't really seem like an answer to me. We make sure that if they want it through a queer lens, it's done through a queer lens. We make sure that if there's been incidents in the community where there is some topics that might be really hard to discuss for young people, that maybe we avoid that, or we just have that knowledge so that we can make sure that young people feel as safe as possible. We also want to make sure that the content is age appropriate. So we offer this workshop from 12 to 25, but the way we deliver to 12 and 13-year-olds is going to be a little bit different to how we deliver to 18 to 25-year-olds. The scenarios will change, the activities will be a little bit different, because we want it to be relatable to the specific group. We don't want to cut anybody off from the education. We want it to be designed for them specifically. And then, of course, researching services in the area to make sure that we can provide the education and the support services necessary. In terms of our learnings, there's been a few. We obviously have had some facilitation barriers in delivering the workshop in the Mallee. It was harder to get into certain spaces than we thought it would. So stigma, of course, that's a massive issue when it comes to sexual health and consent education. There's a lot of misinformation. The one that we get a lot is, oh, if you're teaching consent, then you're teaching young people how to have sex. That's not what I'm doing. I'm really not interested in teaching them how to have sex, because that's just weird. What I am teaching them is how to set boundaries, how to make sure that they feel safe, how to make sure that they know that checking in is hot, checking in sexy. That's a good thing to be doing. And you should be proud of that. You should be proud of being able to set a boundary, and you should be proud of being able to respect a boundary. So that's a really big part of advocating for this workshop, is combating that stigma. There's cultural sensitivities, which I've discussed, but you know, we're willing to adapt to those. We're willing to work with communities, not work for them or against them. Location is a big one, and physical access is a really, really tough one, especially in rural communities. Getting young people to one place to actually hear the workshop is the hardest part. So working really closely with organisations in the area, building relationships with them, and coming up with creative ways in which we can deliver this education. We're very, very happy to be having those conversations with anybody to make sure that we can try and get as many deliveries happening as possible. And then small town politics can play a little bit of a role sometimes, but there are things that we can offer in order to kind of help that. Again, there is that stigma, there is the misinformation. So we can absolutely offer community information sessions as well, whether that be for parents and carers or whether that be for local workers, to talk a little bit about what the workshop is, what the goals and the aims of the workshop is, and discuss any issues or queries or concerns that people have as well. A majority of those, like majority of the time for a community information centre is actually just set up as Q&A time, so we can have an open discussion rather than me talking at people, which I feel like I've done a lot of today, so sorry about that. And then, yeah, that's kind of all the information that I have for you about how we've designed the project. I did want to play one more video for you. It's very quick. No time.
Loz, I'm really sorry, yeah, to wrap you up, but we have only got 5 minutes left and we need to do a bit of opportunity for announcements and things. So what I might do is just encourage you to pop the link for that in the chat, and
absolutely.
Then there's a few comments and questions in the chat, so you could maybe just jump in there and respond to those. But I'll let you finish up and just wrap up if that's all right.
Stunning. Well, that is fine. I will link all the videos that we created. And yeah, if anyone has any other questions about those, you can reach out. How did the conversations go where you were facing stigma, misinformation, any big wins, examples of how you got through to those who were putting up barriers? It's been pretty good so far. Like a lot of the organisations in the Mallee specifically were really on board with the education. There was a little bit of pushback from community, but not much really. And it was more just about being prepared to have those conversations if they arose. And again, we have all the education and the information required. And I think putting people's minds at ease about what we're delivering is the best way to go about it. It's not about, you know, shaming anyone for their what information they do have, because a lot of the time, you know, the reason people might think that we're teaching people how to have sex or whatever issue they have with the content, it's because they just don't have the education themselves, and that's completely okay. So opening up those conversations in a way that we aren't responding with any judgment whatsoever.
Awesome. All right. Well, I might jump in and just wrap up the presentation bit. Thank you so much, Laura. I think people have got an awful lot out of your reflections, and I think a lot of people will be keen to catch up as well. So feel free to follow up with a message out to the whole network. I know you sent something a couple of weeks ago, so you might want to forward that again and just include any other information that you think people might be interested in. And you can find out about YANA on the website, yacvic.org.au. I'm going to end the recording there, Loz.